Welcome to Vices and Volumes, a fortnightly podcast where I explore my collection of 19th century books, uncovering the scandalous, the ordinary, and the unexpectedly human stories hidden inside their pages. My name is Avril Clinton Ford, and I will be your host and guide. Today we're meeting Mary Murray, the Irish matchmaker, a charming, interfering, but very essential part of Irish rural communities. In 19th century Ireland, the matchmaker was a profession more powerful than the priest, more influential than the landlord, and more feared than the taxman. They could make or break a family's future with a single introduction. They travelled from house to house with secrets that would scandalise entire parishes. And they earned their living from the most universal human need, the desperate desire not to be alone. This episode actually came about because I was reading William Carleton's 1845 collection called Tales and Sketches, illustrating the character, usages, traditions, sports and pastimes of the Irish peasantry. I'd managed to pick this one up in a charity shop sometime before Christmas, but I hadn't really looked at it properly until about 2 weeks ago. It had been floating my thoughts though for ages. It originally caught my attention because the spine had these lovely characters, you can see them here, along the back of the spine. And of course, being something Irish, I was very interested to see what was inside it. It also has the most amazing illustrations, which I'll include on Instagram, on the website, etc. So when I finally picked this one up, I stumbled upon this character so vivid and so meddlesome and utterly Irish that I knew I had to share her story. Mary Murray. She wasn't just making introductions at dances, she was engineering marriages, brokering dowries, and quite literally shaping the social fabric of rural Ireland, one match at a time. But before we meet Mary, I need to talk about the man who immortalised her, William Carleton. He was born on February 20th, 1794 in Clougher, County Tyrone. He was the youngest of 14 children, born to a Catholic tenant farmer who somehow supported all of these children on as many acres. Carleton's father had an extraordinary memory. He knew the Bible by heart and he was a native Irish speaker. He possessed what Carleton would later call a thorough acquaintance with Irish folklore. By the fireside, he was told stories, and meanwhile, his mother sang the old Irish songs with what was remembered as wonderful sweetness and pathos. This was Carleton's inheritance: stories, songs, poverty, and poetry. He attended hedge schools as his father moved from one small farm to another, a way of life that would later appear in many of his writings. He briefly studied for the priesthood, but in 1817 he was shaken by what he called an ominous dream, and he left home. By 1818 he had arrived in Dublin with 2 shillings and 9 pence in his pocket. At some point after arriving, he sensibly converted to Protestantism, a pragmatic move. He would have found it difficult as a Catholic author to secure the necessary patronage in the early 19th century Ireland. In 1830, Carleton published Tales and Stories of the Irish Peasantry. This is a 2-volume collection that would make his name. It was immediately successful and remains his masterwork. Carleton saw himself, in his own words, as the historian of their habits and manners, their feelings, their prejudices, their superstitions and their crimes. He was indignant, you see, at the constant misinterpretations of the Irish character, and he resolved to give a faithful picture of the Irish people, warts, whiskey and all. But what made Carleton unique was that he wrote from the inside. Many Irish authors had not experienced the upbringing and the poverty that he had, and he really knew these people. He'd grown up among them, attended their wakes, danced at their weddings, and witnessed their fraction fights. As the Dictionary of Irish Biography notes, Carleton claimed that his representations of peasant life were scrupulously correct and authentic, and that he alone could describe Irish peasants as they are because he participated in their customs and practices as he described. This wasn't folklore collected secondhand, it was his memory. By 1845, when Mary Murray, the Irish Matchmaker, was published in Tales and Sketches, Carleton was an established literary figure. Interestingly, this wasn't the first time he'd written about this character. In 1840, she had appeared in the Irish Penny Journal under the name of Rose Moran. Why he changed her name to Mary Murray 5 years later, we don't know. But perhaps he was protecting someone, or he just liked the sound of it better. What we do know is that Carleton died on January 30th, 1869, and was buried at Mount Tyrone Cemetery in Dublin. His work would be translated into French, German and Italian, ensuring that Irish peasant life in all its complicated, contradictory humanity would be preserved for generations. Carleton begins his sketch by defending the very existence of matchmakers against what he calls the stupid and scandalous trash which has been written about them. He's talking about English writers, of course, who portrayed Irish matchmakers as grotesque creatures. And I am being clear here that Carleton was really up against it. This wasn't literary disagreement. It was often the full weight of Victorian English condescension bearing down on Irish culture. In 1860, Charles Kingsley, chaplain to the Queen of Victoria, Regius Professor of Modern History at Cambridge, the author of The Water Babies, which was written as a children's novel and is uncomfortably racist to read today. When Kingsley visited County Sligo, he wrote to his wife that he was haunted by the human chimpanzees I saw along that 100 miles of horrible country. To see the white chimpanzees is dreadful. If they were black, one would not feel it so much, but their skins, except they're tanned by exposure, as white as ours. This wasn't fringe racism. This was a man tutoring the Prince of Wales. An 1836 British government report had already described the Irish as a less civilised population spreading themselves as a kind of subterranean beneath a more civilised community. The satirical magazine Punch regularly depicted Irish people with ape-like features, prognathous jaws and simian postures. I actually have a couple of copies of these, so I will share them on Instagram and again on the website. They were visual arguments that the Irish were somehow lower on the evolutionary scale. When Carleton published his sketches in the 1830s and 1840s, he was writing directly into this maelstrom of pseudoscientific racism and imperial superiority. Every affectionate portrait of Irish life was an act of defiance. Carleton wanted to set the record straight. He identifies three types of people who typically took on the role of matchmaker in rural Ireland. First, there was the midwife, and as Carleton explains, in the first place, it was frequently the midwife whose confidential capacity gave her such opportunities of playing the part to this advantage. The midwife was present at births, deaths, lie-ins. She knew every family secret, their finances, their fertility, their scandals. She was perfectly positioned to broker marriages. Second, there was what Carleton calls the cosherer. And this is where things get a little bit interesting. The cosherer was some humble dependent of a better class who went about from house to house, sometimes as a beggar, sometimes as a wanderer, and very frequently as a knitter or sewer or seamstress, and who, during her circuits among the families of her acquaintance, became acquainted with their circumstances, and a prime agent in making up matches. You can imagine her, a woman who is always knitting, never idle, moving between households and picking up gossip like lint. Carleton adds a little detail. While knitting, she could keep her eyes as well as her ears open, and no two pieces of candle ever burned together more smoothly than her tongue and her knitting needles. I never saw her that she was not furnished with her ball of worsted and her needles going without intermission. She's poor, yes, but she is essential. She knows things. And those knitting needles clicking away, you can just hear them, the sound of information gathering like Morse code. Third, there was the male equivalent called the Shanachie. Carleton describes him as a man who never worked but went around playing cards, singing songs, telling stories and gossips about weddings and christenings. Essentially, he was a professional lounger with excellent social intelligence. This brings to mind The Cripple of Inishmaan by Martin McDonagh. It was a play I saw in Dublin's Abbey Theatre a long time ago. The character Johnny Peteen Mike was played by a fantastic actor who was a little bit dishevelled with a big beard on him. He arrives bursting in through a doorway with his customary, "I have 3 pieces of news." This was a recurring comedic device in the play, and Johnny Peteen Mike always delivers the most minor news into 3-part announcements for maximum effect, which were comically trivial. A sheep and Kerry with no ears, or a cat who bit a goose. But Carleton introduces us to his matchmaker, Mary Murray, and immediately he tells us what makes her so different. Now, Mary Murray was neither a beggar, nor did she follow any distinct employment by which to support herself. She appeared to live upon what those for whom she negotiated matches gave her. And I believe they were liberal, for I remember her always well dressed and possessing rather more money than, according to her ostensible means, might be easily accounted for. In other words, Mary was making serious money from this, and nobody quite knew how much. Carleton describes Mary Murray with such affection and detail that you can practically see her walking down the road. She was a tall, thin, sallow-complexioned woman who usually wore a long scarlet cloak or a mantle of the same colour, and beneath this crimson cloak you could see striped blue and white stockings and sturdy shoes. In one hand she carried a hazel walking stick and in the other a distaff, because Mary was never idle. Even while walking she spun. The hazel stick and the spinning, or constant industry, even when walking, were symbols. The hazel stick was practical, but hazel sticks have long been associated in Irish folklore with wisdom and protection. Well, protection usually is a weapon. The spinning distaff, that marked her as productive, respectable, not a gossip, but a worker. She wasn't lounging about like the male shanachie. She was spinning thread and spinning matches simultaneously. And where was Mary operating? Carleton places her in townlands around Clogher, County Tyrone, where he mentions Lisboy, Banna, Cara and Towlett, all small townlands in which would have been deeply rural, agricultural country in the first half of the 19th century. These were tight-knit communities where everyone knew everyone else's business, which of course was perfect for a matchmaker. This was Mary's world, a landscape of small farms, hedgerow courting and social networks where marriages weren't just romantic, they were economic transactions that could secure a family's future or condemn them to poverty. And in this world, Mary Murray stepped in with her red cloak and her spinning distaff, ready to make matches. Carleton gives us the most wonderful and highly familiar scene, and it seems almost theatrical. Mary arrives at the Cassidy's house where a young woman named Kitty lives. "Mother, Mary Murray's coming down the Boreen." "Get out of it. No, she's not." "Bad says to me, but she is, that I may never stir if she isn't." "No!" There's great excitement, and the whole family are instantly at the door to see if it really is her, with the exception of the prettiest of them all, Kitty, the eldest girl. "Oh, Farah Koshla kid me the falchagwitch. Och, mushla, what kept you away so long, Mary?" The mother invites Mary in, and immediately you can feel the excitement and heightened drama. "And what news, Mary?" asks one of the sisters. "Sure, you tell us everything, won't you?" "Trot the villish, I have no bad news anyhow. And as to telling you all, Biddy, lay dumb, let me alone." Mary asks for privacy. She needs to speak with the mother alone. Why? Because she's carrying information, a secret information from a young man. Glancing over at Kitty, who's quietly blushing in the corner, she knows that Mary brings a message that will hopefully fulfill her dreams. Mary turns to Kitty. "And Kitty Acushla, where's the welcome from you? That's my favourite." "Now, don't be jealous, children, sure you all know she is, and ever and always was." Carleton tells us Kitty rises up and kisses Mary, who gives her one glance of meaning, accompanied by the slightest imaginable smile and a gentle but significant pressure of the hand. "Miss Cassidy," she says in a half whisper, "don't let anybody know that I'm here. I was desired by somebody, you know. Oh, but never mind, I'm not at liberty to tell you at present." But here she applied her mouth to Miss Cassidy's ear, and the communication went on. Kitty's cheeks by this time were scarlet. "And I was bid to tell you that somebody's very ill, and all about Kitty. For you see, she won't say yes or no, one way or the other." This is brilliant psychological manipulation. Mary has created urgency, he's ill, mystery, somebody, and romantic pressure. She won't give him an answer. All at once. Poor Kitty doesn't stand a chance. Her mother immediately demands to know who this lovesick young man is, and Mary reveals, Andy Lawler. Now, this is where things get even better. The mother knows this is all arranged, but she plays along anyway. "Aye, I'd often had suspicions. Well, I can't see why they shouldn't be married. And so I tell you, Mary, if Andy wishes that he may come tomorrow night and say about 8 o'clock, and we'll talk it over." Now, let me just point out what's happened here. Mary's walked into the house and created a full romantic crisis, implied a young man is on his deathbed from love, gotten both mother and daughter to commit to a match, scheduled the following meeting, all in one visit. And everyone knows this is theatre. Everyone knows Andy Lawler is probably fine, has probably never explicitly said he was dying of love. But the performance gives them all a way to move forward without anyone losing face. This, my friends, is what we call in Ireland the art of the thing. Carleton then shows us how Mary's mind worked. She couldn't look at anything without seeing a potential match. With these people, everything was viewed as matrimonial light. If a man built a good house, married or unmarried that would be a fine place for a wife. If a young farmer was industrious, hard work would kill him, he ought to take a wife. If he was idle, a good industrious wife would bring him to his senses. Had he stock, it was a pity he hadn't had a wife to look after it. Was he poor, a wife and a fortune would set him up. Every situation, every circumstance, every human condition led to the same conclusion. Marriage. A good house needed a wife. A hard-working man needed a wife. A lazy man needed a wife. A rich man needed a wife. A poor man needed a wife with a fortune. It's like those people who get really into CrossFit and suddenly everything's about CrossFit, except instead of suggesting you do burpees, Mary's suggesting you get married. Tired? Marriage will fix that. Happy? Marriage will make you happier. Already married? Well, what about your cousin? And here's the thing about Irish communities, particularly rural ones. Everyone operates like this. Even today it lingers. You can't just exist in a small Irish town. You're either someone's daughter, someone's nephew, someone who bought the old Murphy's place, someone who's still living at home with their mother, God love her. Every piece of information about you gets filed away in the collective community brain. And at some point, someone's auntie is going to decide you'd be perfect for her friend's son who's doing very well for himself in Galway. And you know what? Sometimes those aunties are right. And that's the infuriating part. One of my favourite moments in Carleton's sketch is when he contrasts the matchmaker with the keener, a woman who was hired to wail at funerals. He writes, "The one saw matrimony in everything, and the other death, and the coffin, and the shroud, and the funeral. Each followed her own vocation. The keen woman was never happy unless she had a corpse to attend, and the matchmaker unless she was negotiating matches, or looking out with provident eye for some future couple that might be the proper time to be brought together." The thing about pairing in every Irish community, you had these two women. One who specialised in beginnings and the other who specialised in endings. One who brought people together, one who mourned them apart. Mary and her counterpart, the keener, were like bookends on Irish life. But the real masterclass in matchmaking comes with Biddy O'Sullivan's story. Carleton explains that Biddy was in love with a young man, but neither would make the first move. Enter Mary Murray, marriage mediator, matchmaker facilitator, and broker. First, she visited Biddy and said, "Hi, Biddy dear, I was up at your friends the other night and they were all well and sent their love to you, and I'm not at liberty to tell you what I heard. Only that you're a happy girl, and that's all I'll say." "Why, what is it, Mary?" "Don't keep at me, Jule. Maybe I'll tell you a secret, if you can't keep it. But first of all, promise me that you won't let anyone living know that I told you what I'm going to tell you." Once Biddy swore to secrecy, and honestly, how was she not going to swear after that build-up? Mary revealed. "Well, Paddy McCabe down below there, aye, you may blush, for it's about yourself I'm speaking. Paddy McCabe's heart is broken about you. The crater's in a decline, they say, and all for the love of you, and you won't give him a civil word when you meet him." Now, the absolutely brilliant part is when Mary went straight to Paddy McCabe and then told him the exact same story, but in reverse. She told him that Biddy was wasting away for the love of him. Carleton writes that Mary, when she went to McCabe, informed him that Biddy O'Sullivan was dying for love of him, and that if he did not speak to her in a day or two, that her father would give her to another man. For that, all the family wished her to get married, and that her friends were anxious for a match between Paddy and her. So now you've got Biddy convinced that Paddy's dying of love, and Paddy convinced that Biddy is dying of love, and both of them absolutely mortified at the thought of seeing each other at the next dance. Can you imagine the sheer anxiety of it all? Both Biddy and Paddy showed up at the next dance, each convinced the other was desperately in love. Carleton describes the scene with barely a contained glee. Their blushes, their confusion at meeting, the dilemma in which each felt when they found their mutual passion was mutual, completed the business, for they were married in less than a month. And then, Carleton gives us the kicker. When they were in the chapel, both the bride and bridegroom shed tears at the recollection of the fiction in which each was supposed the other have used, though in the end it proved to be a real and mutual attachment. They were crying in the chapel because each thought the other had lied about being in love. Each thought they'd trapped the other in a marriage based upon lies, and it turned out they actually did love each other. But they didn't know that until they were already married. This is Irish comedy. The whole thing is a catastrophe of miscommunication, manipulation, and social anxiety, and it results in a genuinely happy marriage. This is what Mary did. This is matchmaking as manipulation, matchmaking as theatre, as a contact sport. And Carleton clearly admires her skill. He calls her a matrimonial incendiary, someone who sets romantic fires wherever she went, and the woman was an arsonist, but for love. Not all of Mary's advice was about matches. Sometimes it was about preventing disasters. Carleton tells us a story of a young man who wanted to use his friend as a spokesperson, what was called a blackfoot, to propose on his behalf. Mary was horrified. She warned him, "Never send a friend to court for you. Do your business yourself. If you want a wife, go and tell her so like a man. But never send a messenger or a blackfoot. You may depend on it that if you do, you'll rue it. Trust me, I know the world." Her reasoning? First, he'll be starting to speak better than you yourself. And the girl, she'll see him, comes up for your message, and compare yous both, and maybe give him the preference. This is Mary's oracle, sharing hard-won wisdom. Never ever let any man speak for you in matters of the heart, because women aren't stupid. They'll compare, and you will lose. But there's something deeper happening here. According to historian Joanna Burke in her 1993 study of husbandry and housewifery, Women of Economic Change and Housework in Ireland, 1890 to 1914, women in rural Ireland exercised their limited power primarily through observation and comparison. They couldn't own property, they couldn't vote, but they could absolutely judge which man would make a better husband, and they could, with the constrained system of matchmaking, express that preference. Mary understood this instinctively. She knew women were constantly assessing, evaluating, comparing, and she knew that a man who couldn't speak for himself was already at a disadvantage. This was one of the paradoxes of matchmaking system. It simultaneously controlled women's choices. They couldn't marry without family approval and financial negotiation, while also giving them a strange kind of power, the ability to refuse, the ability to compare, and the ability to say, "I don't want him, I want that one." As historian Margaret McCurtain noted in Women in Irish Society, The Historical Dimension, 1978, where Irish women developed what she calls subterranean influence, power exercised through indirect means, through suggestion, through manipulation of social expectations. Mary Murray was that subterranean influence made visible. While the entire sketch is such an interesting reflection of Irish culture, we can also clearly see how much Carleton liked Mary Murray. He's writing during a period when Irish peasant life was often portrayed as backwards, superstitious, and ridiculous by the English writers. But Carleton doesn't mock Mary, he doesn't condescend to her. Instead, he observes her with genuine affection and even admiration, giving the gift of affection for Mary to the reader. At one point, Carleton writes about Mary's personality. The old lady was an original in her way and a character. She possessed a vein of humour peculiar to some Irish females, particularly those of the old school, and a kind of good-humoured sarcasm which provoked laughter but never resentment, a shrewd practical knowledge of character, and a happy offhand promptitude in retort, and, though last not least, a most providential and abundant flow of language. Carleton recognised something essential about Mary and women like her. They possessed a sharp, subversive intelligence that expressed itself through humour. They could say outrageous things, make cutting observations, but do it with such charm that nobody took offence. This was power, exercised through wit rather than force. And that phrase, good-humoured sarcasm, it's a particular Irish trait, the ability to insult someone while making them laugh. It's the glint of the eye that says, "I see right through you, but I like you anyway." Never unkind, just allowing you both to observe what is funny about being your unique self. Carleton also notes, she had what might be termed as a mirthful eye. It was a kind of roguish drollery that was irresistible. He's describing that particular Irish quality, you know, the one where that look suggests the person knows exactly what you're thinking, knows exactly what you're up to, and is enjoying the whole performance immensely. It's the look your Irish granny gives you when you can try to convince her that you're just tired after a night out. She knows. She knows, and she is delighted by your audacity in even trying. What Carleton captures here is the reality of a small, tight knit community in rural Ireland. Mary was simultaneously essential and annoying. Families needed to arrange marriages, to broker dowries, to smooth over social difficulties, but she was also a meddler and someone who knew too much and probably said too much too. And here's the thing about Irish villages, this dynamic, it still exists. Everyone knows everyone's business, everyone involved in everyone else's life. Your business is the parish's business. Your romantic failures are discussed at your post office. Your career choices are debated at mass. And your mother's friend's sister's daughter has an opinion about your haircut. It's suffocating and supportive in equal measure. It's intrusive and comforting. It's the reason people leave Ireland for London or New York, and it's the reason they come back and never quite leave again. The community embraces you and smothers you at the same time. They celebrate your successes and dissect your failures. They're genuinely thrilled when you do well and somehow also slightly disappointed when you're not doing even better. Someone will generally comment that you have notions when you turn up with the wrong fancy handbag, and there's always an auntie who thinks you should be married by now. This is the world Mary Murray lived in and operated in. According to sociologist Tom Ingalls in his 1998 study, Moral Monopoly, The Rise and Fall of Catholic Church in a Modern Ireland, the Irish rural communities operated on what he calls networks of moral surveillance, where everyone was watching everyone else, and social conformity was enforced through gossip, suggestion, and community pressure. Mary Murray was part of that surveillance system, but she was also using it for her own purposes, to make money, to exercise power, and yes, to actually help people find partners. That is what Carleton's portrait is so honest. This is what makes Carleton's portrait so honest. He doesn't idealise Mary, he shows her as she was. Clever, funny, intrusive, skilled, exasperating, and absolutely indispensable. He ends the sketch with genuine fondness. Poor Mary, matchmaking was the greatest business of your simple but not absolutely harmless life. You are long since, we trust, gone to the happy place where there are neither marryings nor givings in marriage, but where you will have a long Sabbath from your old habits and tendencies. We love for more reasons than either one or two can think of your faded crimson cloak, peaked shoes, hazel staff, clear grey eye, and a nose and chin that were so full of character. As you used to say yourself, Banachlat, my blessings be with you. In a world of arranged marriages, poverty, and limited choices, Mary Murray brought couples together who actually worked, and that in the end was no small achievement. Or as they'd say in her own community, fair play to her, she did all right. While we may feel full of romance at matchmaking in 19th century Ireland, it wasn't just about love. Of course, it was about survival. According to historian K.H. Connell in his 1962 study Peasant Marriage in Ireland, its structure and development since the famine, marriage in pre-famine Ireland was fundamentally an economic arrangement where the holding rather than the family was the unit. The farm was what mattered. Love was lovely if you got it, but the land was essential. And here's where it gets a little interesting for women. According to research by Maria Luddy in Women in Ireland 1800 to 1918, a documentary history from 95, women in Ireland had virtually no direct control over property, but they had enormous indirect influence through matchmaking negotiations. A woman's dowry, her fortune, was often the only economic power she ever possessed, and it wouldn't have been much. The matchmaker was the one who brokered that power. This is why Mary Murray's role was so crucial. She wasn't just introducing people at dances, she was actually negotiating financial settlements, mediating between families, and determining who got what land. In a society where women couldn't own property but could bring property to a marriage, the matchmaker was the one of the few people with real economic power. Carleton understood this perfectly. That's why he shows us Mary at all levels of society, negotiating matches among the very poor where deals broke down over the slip of a pig, and also working with families who had actual dowries to offer. The economics weren't different, but the fundamental transaction was the same, trading a woman's fortune for a man's land and labour. And can we just acknowledge how absolutely wild this sounds today? The entire concept of your Auntie Bridie turning up at the house to tell you that Paddy down the road is dying of love for you, when in fact Paddy doesn't even know you exist yet. The whole thing is an elaborate setup to get you married off before you were 30 and to make the best transaction possible. What Carleton captures really well is that everyone knew this. It was a performance. Everyone was in on the game. The mothers knew, the young couples knew, even Mary knew that they knew. But the ritual mattered. The theatre of the courtship created a social framework where shy people could meet, where families could negotiate without losing face, and where economic necessity could be dressed up in the language of romance. It's the same reason small towns in Ireland still do things the way they do. In my grandmother's generation, and I suspect many of yours, they grew up in communities exactly like this, where marriage wasn't just about two people getting married. It was a community event, negotiated by proxy, arranged by the aunties, and celebrated by the entire parish. And would you believe that this still kind of goes on a little bit today? Every September, Lisdoonvarna in County Clare holds Europe's largest matchmaking festival, a tradition now over 165 years old. Willie Daly, the fourth generation matchmaker, sits in the Matchmakers bar with his 150-year-old lucky book and actually makes matches. Is it commercialised? Of course, absolutely. Is it slightly ridiculous? Completely. But people still show up. They still hope. They still touch that lucky book with both hands, wishing for a marriage within 6 months. Because here's what Mary Murray knew and what every matchmaker since has known. People are absolutely terrible at finding each other on their own. We need a little help. We've always needed help. And that help comes from a woman in a red cloak in 1845 or from Tinder in 2025. The human need is exactly the same. So what do we take from all of this wonderful stories from Mary Murray? What drew me to the story in the first place was Carleton's portrait of a woman who made her living from other people's need for companionship. Mary didn't produce anything tangible. What she offered was social engineering. She understood people, she understood desire, and she understood pride and shyness and fear. She also used that understanding to create marriages that by all accounts seemed to work. There's something oddly modern about Mary too. She was an independent woman in a society that didn't really have a category for independent women. She earned money through emotional intelligence and social manipulation. She was both respected and slightly suspected, and was essential, but also intrusive. And Carleton, bless him, he saw all of this and wrote it down with affection and humour. He ends the sketch with a simple tribute. Peace be to her memory. And I'll echo that. Peace be to Mary Murray and the Irish matchmaker. May we all find someone who sees our potential matches as clearly as she did, but maybe with a little slight less meddling. If you'd like to see the full text along with my notes and some links to some of the stories here, you can find everything linked in the episode description or on my website, vicesandvolumes.com. Until next time, may your matchmaker never arrive in a red cloak with an ominous intelligence about your romantic prospects. May you never weep at your own wedding convinced the other party has deceived you. And may no one ever mistake your genuine affection for death by lovesickness requiring immediate matrimonial intervention. This has been Vices and Volumes. I'm Avril. Thank you for listening. Creating this podcast is a genuine joy for me, and knowing that you're out there listening and engaging with these stories makes it all worthwhile. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Vices and Volumes on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen, and consider leaving a rating or review. It truly helps the show. You can also follow along on Instagram, Facebook and TikTok at Vices and Volumes, or visit vicesandvolumes.wordpress.com for more information. And please reach out and let me know what you think. I love hearing from you. Thank you for being a part of this journey.